My name is Audrey Rhodes. I'm 28 years old, and if you'd asked me a year ago what my life looked like, I would have told you I was building a future with the man I loved. I was working as a data analyst for a mid-sized tech firm downtown. A job that wasn't glamorous but gave me purpose. Numbers made sense. People didn't always, but data did. My days were filled with dashboards, client metrics, and late-night debugging sessions under the soft hum of fluorescent lights. I told myself I was lucky. Steady job, stable income, a decent one-bedroom apartment with plants that somehow survived my neglect. And then, there was Ethan Vance. Ethan was charm in human form, ambitious, magnetic, the kind of man who could make a networking event feel like a movie premiere. When we met, he was all vision and promise. He talked about startups, investments, the kind of big picture that made me feel small and safe all at once. For 3 years, I poured myself into that relationship like it was my life's project. When he lost his job early on, I didn't hesitate. I covered his rent, paid off his lingering credit card bills, even financed a few of his business courses that he swore would change everything. I told myself that's what love was: partnership, patience, building together. I believed in his potential so much that I dimmed my own. At first, it felt noble, sacrificial in the way love songs romanticize. But slowly, the weight of it began to grind me down. I started skipping lunches to meet deadlines. I lived off caffeine cold brew in the morning, matcha by noon, espresso shots at 4 just to stay alert. My body was running on fumes, my brain fogged and scattered. I remember staring at my monitor one afternoon, unable to recall what I'd just coded 2 minutes earlier. Burnout crept in quietly, disguised as dedication. I kept pushing because I thought if I worked harder, earned more, Ethan would see me as valuable, not just supportive, but impressive. But Ethan thrived on optics, not effort. He was the kind of man who measured success by the people who noticed you. When I came home exhausted, still in my oversized hoodie from the office, he'd already be dressed sharp, scrolling through his phone, talking about who he met that day: investors, founders, influencers. He loved that word. Connections. It was his oxygen. Mine was silence. But he never noticed the difference. The shift came slowly, like erosion. The compliments faded first. Then came the comparisons, small jabs disguised as advice. You know, Chloe's boyfriend just got promoted to senior architect. They're talking about moving to London, he'd say while buttoning his cuffs. Or, Megan's fiancé just bought her a vintage car. You two should hang out, you could learn a thing or two about ambition. I'd laugh it off, pretend it didn't sting, but each word chipped away at something in me I couldn't replace. I started dressing differently, sharper, tighter. I swapped sneakers for heels, took makeup tutorials at midnight, tried to mirror the women he praised, women who floated through rooms dripping in confidence and curated charm. Still, nothing I did seemed to impress him. He'd glance at me, adjust my collar, and say things like, "You should smile more. You have a great face when you try." Try. That word became a blade, and yet, I stayed. I told myself love required endurance, that people grew through friction. But the truth was, I was shrinking. My world revolved around keeping him happy, around minimizing conflict. Every time he criticized me, I recalibrated myself, desperate to fit whatever shape he wanted that week. The Ethan I fell for, the dreamer, was fading, replaced by a man who saw relationships as status symbols. The last straw didn't come in a fight. It came over dinner, in a restaurant I didn't even want to go to. The fine dining tapas bar was his idea. It was one of those minimalist, pretentious places where the plates are small, the lights are dim, and every dish comes with a story. I remember hesitating when he made the reservation. "Can't we just order in?" I asked. He smiled, the kind of smile that told me no wasn't an option. "Audrey, it's good for us to be seen at places like this." Seen. That word again, never felt, never loved, always seen. That Friday night, I dressed carefully, a black dress I bought on sale but never wore. Simple gold hoops, hair pulled back sleek. I wanted to look effortless, the way he liked women to look when they were trying too hard. When I arrived, Ethan was already there, scrolling on his phone, drink half empty. He barely looked up when I sat down. "Hey," he muttered, eyes flicking between me and the screen. I tried to start a conversation, asked about his day, the pitch he'd been preparing. But he gave half answers, distracted, detached. The waiter brought out our first course, something with truffle oil and microgreens, and I pushed it around my plate, appetite gone. There was a tension in the air I couldn't name yet, but I could feel it in the way his jaw clenched when I spoke, the way he sighed as if my voice was background noise. Halfway through the meal, he finally set his phone down and looked at me with this strange mix of pity and detachment. My stomach tightened. I thought maybe he was about to tell me something important. Maybe he wanted to talk about the future, or maybe, foolishly, I thought he was going to propose. His tone was soft, careful. "Can I be honest with you, Audrey?" My heart skipped. "Of course," I said. Then he leaned forward and said it, the sentence that cracked everything open. "My friends, they're kind of embarrassed for me when I bring you around." For a moment, I didn't understand. Embarrassed? I blinked, waiting for the punchline, but he didn't smile. "You're just not impressive," he continued, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "Like, Chloe's boyfriend is a surgeon, he travels, he's got stories. Megan's guy owns a boat, they're in the Bahamas every other month. And you? You sit behind a screen all day. What do I even tell people about that? It's dull, Audrey. It's humiliating." I felt my throat close. The words didn't just hurt, they rewrote the past 3 years in one breath. Everything I'd done for him, every late night I'd spent keeping us afloat, was now reduced to humiliation. My mind scrambled for logic, for calm. "So, this is about appearances?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He sighed, as if I was too naive to understand. "It's not just that. I've met someone. Her name's Serena Hayes. We met at a networking event last month, the one you skipped because you were tired." He paused, as if savoring the cruelty. "She's in venture capital, drives a Tesla, she's got connections everywhere. With her, I feel like I'm elevating. With you, it feels like settling." Settling. The word echoed in my head like a bell. I stared at him, at the man I once believed in, now revealing his truest self under dim lighting and expensive wine. My heart didn't break in a cinematic way, it hardened. For a moment, I thought I might cry, but the tears never came. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. I picked up my chopsticks, placed them neatly beside my plate, and slid my half of the bill across the table. The clink of the card against the wood was the loudest sound between us. He looked startled, as if he expected me to beg, to ask what I could do differently, to promise to improve. Instead, I met his eyes and said quietly, "Okay, Ethan, good luck with that." I stood, reaching for my coat, my movements deliberate, measured. He opened his mouth, maybe to call after me, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned and walked out. The cool night air hit my lungs like a baptism. Sharp. Clean. Sobering. Behind me, laughter and clinking glasses spilled out from the restaurant, but I didn't look back. Each step I took away from that table felt like reclaiming a part of myself. I'd traded away one compromise at a time. My hands trembled as I reached for my car keys, not from grief, but from clarity. That night wasn't a breakdown. It was an awakening. For 3 years, I had built my life around someone else's image of success, and in one cruel sentence, he freed me from it. As I drove home, city lights blurring through the windshield, I realized something profound. I had been chasing validation from a man who couldn't even recognize real value if it wasn't wrapped in glitter. He mistook humility for weakness, stability for stagnation. But the truth was, I had been the foundation all along. And as the radio hummed softly in the background, I whispered to myself, "He called you unimpressive. Prove him wrong." And for the first time in years, I meant it not for him, but for me. The pain came in waves that night, like a fever that refused to break. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in the black dress that suddenly felt like a costume. makeup smudged, mascara pooling beneath my eyes. My reflection in the mirror looked hollow, someone halfway between heartbreak and awakening. I replayed his words again and again. "You're just not impressive." Each repetition hit differently, first like fire, then like ice. But beneath the sting, a deeper truth began to surface. He hadn't loved me. He'd managed me. Every compliment, every criticism, every carefully timed silence, it was control, wrapped in charm. I thought I'd been choosing him, but really, I'd been performing for his approval. Ethan didn't want a partner. He wanted a mirror that reflected only his best angles. The next morning, the apartment felt eerily quiet. His toothbrush was gone, but the ghost of his presence lingered in the half-empty dresser drawer, the coffee mug he always left unwashed, the faint scent of his cologne trapped in the air. I made myself a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no milk, just something bitter and honest. My hands shook as I held it. I wanted to distract myself, to rationalize, to minimize. But instead, I did something radical. I allowed myself to feel everything. The grief, the humiliation, the rage. It wasn't just about losing him, it was about realizing how much of myself I'd abandoned trying to keep him. That week, I found myself scrolling aimlessly through forums at 2 a.m., typing words like, "He made me feel small," "toxic relationship recovery," and "how to rebuild after emotional manipulation." One night, I stumbled upon a self-help subreddit for women recovering from narcissistic partners. The stories there were raw, different faces, same patterns. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I was one of them. A stranger with a username I'll never remember commented on my post. "You don't heal by proving your worth to him. You heal by remembering it was never his to measure." That line hit like truth disguised as poetry. I copied it onto a sticky note and placed it on my bathroom mirror. It became my mantra. Eventually, I started therapy. My therapist, Dr. Kaplan, was patient but direct, the kind of woman who wore linen shirts and spoke like every sentence had been through revision. She helped me untangle the threads of codependency that had bound me to Ethan. "You built your self-esteem around someone else's perception," she said in one session, tapping her pen softly against her notepad. "You confused emotional labor with love." I remember sitting there, legs crossed, trying not to cry. "So, how do I stop?" I asked. She smiled gently. "You start by setting boundaries and enforcing them. Not for others, for yourself. Every time you say no without explaining why, you reclaim a piece of your power." It sounded abstract at first, but I clung to it. Slowly, saying no stopped feeling like rebellion and started feeling like relief. Rebuilding wasn't cinematic. It was monotonous, uncomfortable, and sometimes painfully slow. But it was real. I began running in the mornings, even though the first week nearly broke me. My lungs burned, my calves screamed, but the rhythm of my feet against the pavement became its own therapy. Each run felt like peeling off another layer of old pain. The crisp morning air stung my throat, the city still half asleep around me. I'd come home flushed, drenched in sweat, but alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Work became a different kind of sanctuary. I poured myself into projects, not for distraction, but for rediscovery. One night, after debugging a stubborn data model that had been haunting me for weeks, I sat back and listened to the sound of my code running clean. No errors, no warnings, just the quiet hum of success. It was such a small thing, but it filled me with a deep, quiet pride. When my manager called me into her office the following month and offered me a promotion to senior data analyst, I didn't second-guess myself. I didn't look for someone to validate it. I simply said, "Thank you. I've earned this." Around that time, I moved into a new apartment, a one-bedroom loft on the edge of the city. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. The scent of new paint still lingered in the air, fresh and slightly chemical, like possibility. I furnished it slowly, piece by piece: a secondhand bookshelf, a thrifted armchair, a small succulent named Pixel that I somehow managed not to kill. Every item had intention, no clutter, no compromises. For the first time, my space felt like an extension of me, not a reflection of anyone else's taste. Somewhere in the middle of this rebuilding, I joined a local hiking group. It was impulsive, a suggestion from my therapist to reconnect with the physical world instead of living in my head. That's where I met Liam Carter. He wasn't the kind of man who filled a room with his presence. He grounded it. Worn flannel, sun-browned skin, the kind of laugh that came from somewhere honest. He worked as an environmental engineer, but you'd never hear it from him first. No self-promotion, no performance. The first time we spoke, it was at the base of a trail just outside the city. I was tying my shoelaces when he offered me an extra granola bar, saying, "You'll need this at mile 3. I remember laughing, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. By mile 3, I was gasping for air, and he just smiled, quietly matching his pace to mine. There was no spark in the cinematic sense, no electric moment of recognition. It was gentler than that, slower. After the hike, he offered to grab coffee with the group, but when we reached the cafe, he noticed I preferred to sit by the window, away from the noise. Without a word, he chose the seat beside me instead of across, like he wanted to share my silence rather than fill it. He talked about trail restoration projects, about small, tangible things, planting trees, fixing erosion paths. It struck me how different he was from Ethan. No need to impress, no curated image. He existed without performance, and that was enough. Over the next few weeks, our paths kept crossing, sometimes at group hikes, sometimes by coincidence at the same farmer's market. I found myself looking forward to his steady presence. There was something healing about the simplicity of it. One afternoon, after a long hike through wet pine trails, he offered me his jacket when it started to drizzle. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and rain, grounding and safe. When he said, "You look like someone who's finally breathing again," I didn't realize how true it was until that moment. Life didn't magically become perfect. I still had moments when old memories crept in, Ethan's voice whispering in the back of my head, telling me I wasn't enough. But now, I had tools. I had boundaries. I had people, my therapist, the online community, a small circle of women who understood what it meant to rebuild from the ashes. And I had myself, the version of me who ran through dawn mist, who debugged code until it purred, who could finally look in the mirror and see someone whole. Then, one evening, as I sat at my desk finishing a freelance data visualization project, a message pinged on my phone from Chloe, the same Chloe whose boyfriend Ethan once idolized. "Hey, I thought you should know things aren't great for Ethan. Serena Hayes got caught inflating her client numbers. Investors are pulling out. His venture's basically done." I stared at the screen, heartbeat steady. There was no surge of satisfaction, no rush of vindication. Just quiet clarity. The man who once measured worth by association had built his empire on illusion, and it was finally collapsing. I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and stepped onto my balcony. The night air was cool, the city skyline glowing softly in the distance. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. Ethan's world was falling apart, but mine was finally being built, brick by brick, on truth. I thought about that line from the subreddit, the one I'd written on my mirror months ago. "You don't heal by proving your worth to him." I whispered it again, softly this time, like a prayer I no longer needed to believe in to make true. Because I already had. It started as a whisper online, something about Serena Hayes, her fund, and the investors she'd supposedly secured for Ethan's startup. At first, I ignored it. Gossip travels fast in tech circles, and I didn't care to follow his story anymore. But soon, the whispers became headlines. Serena wasn't a venture capitalist at all. She was a front for what one journalist called a startup mirage, a classic pump and flash scheme. It was the kind of scam that's become too familiar in the post-pandemic world. Fake investment decks, photos staged at rented co-working spaces, Instagram stories filled with champagne and whiteboards. I read one article that said over 65% of investor fraud cases in early-stage startups involved social validation tactics, the illusion of success sold through image, not numbers. That was Serena's specialty. She curated success like a brand. And Ethan, image-obsessed as ever, had been her perfect accessory. When the story broke, her accounts disappeared overnight. The investors she'd charmed went silent, lawyers started circling, and Ethan's name was suddenly being whispered for all the wrong reasons. The startup, Helios, collapsed within weeks. The website vanished. His LinkedIn updates stopped. It was like someone had unplugged his entire existence. The first text came 3 weeks later. "Audrey, can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't reply. Then another. "I know I messed up, but you're the only person who ever believed in me." I deleted that one too. The next few messages grew more frantic. "Please, I just need a friend right now." Then, "I can explain everything." Serena lied to me. When silence became my answer, he started using middlemen. Chloe texted first, something polite and hesitant. "He's not doing great, Audrey. Maybe just talk to him?" I thanked her but said no. A few days later, Megan messaged, "He's spiraling. You don't owe him anything, but closure might help both of you." Closure. I'd already found mine months ago on a quiet balcony, watching the city breathe beneath me. But something about the way Megan phrased it lingered. Maybe I wanted to see him, not for him, but for me. To confirm that the illusion was gone, that I was truly free. We met at a cafe downtown. One of those newly opened spaces with mismatched chairs, exposed brick, and the smell of roasted beans so rich it almost felt indulgent. I picked the spot deliberately, a place filled with life, warmth, noise. The opposite of who we'd been. I arrived early, ordered a flat white, and chose a seat by the window. My hands were steady. When Ethan walked in, it took me a full minute to recognize him. He looked deflated. The sharp suits were gone, replaced by a wrinkled hoodie and faded jeans. His hair was longer, unkempt, and his once carefully trimmed beard had grown uneven, patchy. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, and his posture, once so straight and performative, was slouched, defensive. The confidence that used to fill the room now barely filled his chair. "Hey," he said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. His voice cracked slightly. I nodded. "Ethan." For a moment, he just stared, like he couldn't quite believe I was real. "You look different," he said. "Better, I mean." His eyes darted to my left hand, where no ring existed, and then away again. "I've had a rough few months." "I heard," I said. My tone was neutral. Not cruel, just factual. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's all lies, Audrey. Serena wasn't who she said she was. She used me. She took everything: contacts, funds, reputation. I didn't even know half the stuff she was doing." I listened without interrupting, stirring my coffee slowly. "You know," I said finally. "That's almost poetic." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You spent years caring about appearances, Ethan. You built your life around being seen with impressive people, at impressive places. Serena was just the mirror you deserved." He winced. "That's not fair. You know I'm not a bad person." "Maybe not," I said quietly. "But you made me feel like I was." He looked at me, then really looked. And for a second, I thought I saw genuine regret flicker behind the exhaustion. "I was stupid," he murmured. "You were the only person who ever cared about me for real. And I threw that away." Before I could answer, a familiar shadow fell across the table. Liam had just entered the cafe, coffee in hand, spotting me from the counter. When he noticed Ethan, his expression stayed calm but alert. He walked over slowly, resting a steady hand on my shoulder. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his voice low, protective but not possessive. Ethan glanced at him, then back at me. "So this is the new guy?" There was a bitter edge to his tone. "Yes," I said simply. "This is Liam." Liam extended a hand. "Ethan, right? I've heard about you." The firmness in his grip was polite but unmistakable. Ethan didn't shake it. He just stared between us, realizing, perhaps for the first time, how small he looked now. After a few tense seconds, I stood. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." I meant it not as a kindness, but as closure. As we walked out, I could feel his eyes on me, searching for something to hold on to. But I'd left nothing behind. Over the next few weeks, word of his downfall continued to spread. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Investors demanded refunds. Even Chloe and Megan, once part of his curated social circle, stopped defending him. I didn't take pleasure in it, but there was a strange satisfaction in watching reality catch up with image. Then, one night, I was invited to a rooftop gathering hosted by mutual acquaintances from the tech scene. I almost declined, but curiosity won. When I arrived, the city glowed beneath strings of warm lights. The air was cool, the kind of night that hums with quiet possibility. People were sipping cocktails, laughing, trading stories about startups, markets, and life after failure. And then I saw him, Ethan, standing near the edge of the crowd. Alone. He looked worse than before. Thinner. The hollowness in his face was more pronounced, like the weight of everything had finally settled on his bones. His hands trembled slightly as he nursed a drink. Conversations around him quieted when he passed, then picked up again once he was gone. The king of optics had become a ghost in his own kingdom. At one point, our eyes met across the rooftop. The crowd seemed to blur. He hesitated, then started walking toward me. I didn't move. When he stopped a few feet away, his voice was small, hoarse. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. "For everything. For how I treated you. For not seeing you." I studied him, taking in the man who once made me feel invisible. He looked fragile now, transparent, even. But I felt nothing. No hatred, no pity. Just an unshakable clarity. This was the full circle moment, not revenge, but revelation. I took a slow step closer, enough for only him to hear me. "Tell me," I said, my voice low, deliberate. "Who should be embarrassed now?" The words hung between us like glass, sharp, reflective, undeniable. Around us, I could feel the subtle shift. Chloe turned her head slightly. Megan's laughter died mid-sentence. A few others exchanged glances, understanding exactly what had just been said. Ethan's face flushed, eyes darting away. For once, there was no comeback, no performance, just silence. I turned and walked toward the balcony, the wind catching my hair, the city lights glimmering below. Liam was waiting there, leaning against the railing, his expression soft but steady. When our eyes met, he didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He just reached for my hand, and I let him. Behind me, I could hear the faint buzz of conversation resuming, laughter spilling back into the air, life moving on. Ethan faded into the background, just another ghost of a story that no longer belonged to me. As I looked out at the skyline, a single thought crossed my mind, not triumph, not vengeance, but peace. There's a special kind of power in walking away without needing to be understood. I'd been broken down, rebuilt, and reborn not from love lost, but from self regained. And in that quiet, expansive moment, I finally understood what it meant to be truly impressive. The months that followed the rooftop confrontation unfolded like the quiet after a storm, still, clear, almost sacred. There was no dramatic aftershock, no lingering bitterness, no obsession with how Ethan's story would end. His name became like distant thunder, faint, irrelevant, too far away to matter. Every now and then, someone from the old circle would mention him in passing. "Did you hear? Ethan moved out of the city. He's doing consulting work now, I think. He keeps a low profile." Each time, I'd nod politely and let the words drift away. He'd become what he always feared most: forgettable. A cautionary echo, proof that charisma without character eventually collapses under its own weight. Meanwhile, my life was no longer about rebuilding. It was about living. Real, unfiltered, ordinary living, the kind that doesn't need an audience to feel full. Liam and I found a rhythm that was simple, steady, and deeply grounding. We spent weekends hiking trails that wound through forests damp with morning dew. He'd point out trees by name, tell me how roots communicate underground, and I'd listen fascinated not by the trivia, but by the way he noticed the world. On Sunday mornings, we'd wake up early to make breakfast together. His pancakes were always slightly uneven, mine always a little burnt, but the kitchen smelled like butter and laughter. Sometimes, after work, we'd sit on the balcony with cheap wine and playlists made from songs neither of us would admit we loved as teenagers. There were no grand gestures, no filtered perfection, just the quiet certainty of peace. I still worked as a data scientist, but the way I approached my job had shifted. I no longer saw success as something to prove. I saw it as something to nurture. I took on freelance projects that genuinely interested me, nonprofits, environmental initiatives, even a mentorship program for young women entering STEM. The satisfaction wasn't in applause, it was in alignment. I learned that productivity meant nothing without purpose. My burnout had taught me something precious. You can't fill your life with output and expect it to substitute for meaning. Every so often, I thought about how far I'd come since that night at the Tapas bar. Back then, I'd measured myself through someone else's lens, believing that worth was something to be earned, not remembered. Now, I understood that real power comes from stillness. From knowing who you are even when nobody's watching. The woman who once ran on caffeine and fear had learned to rest without guilt. The woman who once stayed quiet to keep the peace had learned that silence, when chosen, is strength, not submission. Therapy remained a part of my life not because I was broken, but because I valued maintenance over crisis. Dr. Kaplan once told me something that stuck. Healing isn't about becoming who you were before. It's about creating someone wiser than you could have been without the pain. I'd written it in my journal, underlined twice. It reminded me that trauma, when processed, doesn't define you, it refines you. I'd read something similar on Good is an article about emotional resilience that said, every scar is a data point. It tells you what hurt you, but also what you survived. I liked that. I'd spent years analyzing data to find patterns in chaos. I'd just never realized that healing worked the same way. Sometimes, I'd get messages from women who had followed my quiet transformation online. A few had read my posts about leaving toxic relationships, about finding strength in solitude. One message, from a woman named Layla, stood out. She wrote, "You don't know me, but reading your story made me walk away from someone who made me feel small. Thank you for reminding me that I'm allowed to take up space." I cried when I read that. Because that was the point, wasn't it? To turn pain into purpose, to make the darkness useful somehow. Liam understood that part of me without explanation. He never tried to fix me, never tiptoed around my scars. He treated them like geography, part of the terrain, but not the destination. One evening, as we watched the sunset from our balcony, he said, "You know, I think everyone meets someone who breaks them just enough to see what they're made of." I smiled. "Then I guess Ethan was my fracture." He nodded. "And look how well you healed." It wasn't lost on me how full circle life could feel. There was a time when I believed closure would come from apology, from hearing Ethan say the right words, finally acknowledging the damage. But true closure had nothing to do with him. It came the moment I stopped waiting for validation from the person who broke me. It came when I realized I could give it to myself. Ethan's shadow no longer lingered in my story. He existed only as a faint lesson, a reminder of what happens when people chase mirrors instead of meaning. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't wish him pain. I simply wished him distance. Some ghosts deserve to stay where they belong, behind you. One morning, while jogging along the waterfront, I saw my reflection in the glass windows of a new cafe, the same way I once caught sight of myself after the breakup. But this time, I stopped. The woman looking back at me wasn't exhausted or uncertain. She was strong, calm, grounded. The kind of woman who didn't need to prove she was impressive, because she already knew she was enough. In that reflection, I saw more than recovery, I saw rebirth. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet kind that happens when you finally understand that the greatest revenge isn't showing them you've succeeded. It's showing yourself you've survived and thrived without needing them. Psychologists often talk about post-traumatic growth, the ability to not just recover from adversity, but to evolve through it. Bright side. To me, once summarized it perfectly. What breaks, you can also build you, if you choose to shape it, rather than escape it. I had shaped it. The pain became a tool, not a prison. There's this misconception that empowerment looks loud, that it's shouting your worth to the world, proving your power through dominance or defiance. But real empowerment, I've learned, is quieter. It's choosing peace over performance. It's saying no without apology. It's loving without losing yourself. It's walking past your past without needing to burn it down. As seasons shifted and life settled into its steady rhythm, I found joy in the smallest things. The smell of rain on pavement, the hum of my computer during a late-night project, the warmth of Liam's hand as we crossed a busy street. These weren't grand victories, but they were real ones. They were mine. Sometimes, I think about that younger version of me, the one who sat in a dim restaurant, breaking quietly, while a man told her she wasn't impressive. I wish I could tell her that the pain would become proof. That someday, she'd sit in the same city, stronger, freer, surrounded by a love that didn't need to be earned. I wish I could tell her that she didn't need to shine to be seen, that she only needed to be whole. Because in the end, that's what the journey was really about. Not vengeance, not vindication, but value. My own. The kind that doesn't vanish when someone else fails to recognize it. So if there's one truth I want to leave behind, it's this. The greatest revenge is not success, or recognition, or proving your worth to those who doubted you. The greatest revenge is self-respect, the kind that doesn't waver when others do. It's the quiet confidence of knowing that your peace, your growth, and your joy are not open for comparison. As I stood on that balcony one final time, city lights shimmering below, I whispered a line that had carried me through it all. He called you unimpressive, prove him wrong. But now, it meant something different. I didn't need to prove anything to him. I already had to myself. And that, I realized, was the most impressive thing of all.